Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the informational webinar about the National Estuaries Program Coastal Watersheds Grant 2021 round. I'm Suzanne Simon. I am the program director for this grants program. I am joined today by RAI's Senior Director for Restoration Administration, Elsa Schwartz. So you will be hearing her voice from time to time as she helps me field questions and any other tech issues. The request for proposals, along with a lot of other information, is available on our website, which is www.estuaries.org. I'm going to turn off my camera now, but I did want to do a quick hi so you can put a face to a name. And we'll get on with the presentation. Okay, so some housekeeping points. Oh, yes, and Elsa is also going to be, thank you, Elsa. Elsa will also be providing some useful links in the chat as we go along, so pay attention to that as well. All right, some quick housekeeping notes. Everybody is on mute. If you have a question or a comment, please submit it via the control panel. If we do not address your comment or question, please email me. My email address is in the webinar registration confirmation email. I'll also have it displayed on the last slide. You can also check our website, and it is scattered throughout the RFP. This webinar is the second of two, and it is being recorded, and we will post one of the recordings to the RAI's YouTube channel and website. So here's what we're going to cover today. We'll do an overview of the program, go over eligibility, funding amount, and anticipated awards, budget and match, and then the overall process and deadlines. Please keep in mind that the RFP, and if there's not something that's covered in the RFP, email me. That's going to be your best bet. This overall webinar is going to give you a bigger picture and highlight some of the key issues in the RFP and the grant program in general. But I strongly encourage you to read the RFP, as there's a lot more detail there. For those of you who may not know who we are, Restore America's Estuaries, you'll also hear us use the acronym of RAE, R-A-E, is a national alliance of 10 member groups shown here on the website. And we are dedicated to the protection and restoration of bays and estuaries as essential resources for our nation. Now, before we dig into the program, I wanted to make you aware of a couple of things here. We have some really great events coming up. One of them, the next one, and this is in person, which is super exciting, is the Living Shorelines Tech Transfer Workshop, October 19th and 20th in Cape May, New Jersey. And this is sort of hot off the presses. The 2022 summit is going to be in December of 2022 in New Orleans, Louisiana. For those of us who joined us in 2016, it's going to be at the same venue. So already put that in your budgets for sure. There's also another, a whole bunch of great resources and webinars on our website, including things like the Restoration Toolkit and some other resources. So I encourage you to check that out. Okay, on to the overall picture of the program. So you've heard me say, call it the NEP Coastal Watersheds Program. The NEP, part of it, stands for the National Estuary Program, which is a place-based program within the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, also known as EPA, with the goal to protect and restore water quality and ecological integrity of estuaries of national significance. Currently, 28 estuaries located along the Atlantic, Gulf, and Pacific coasts and Puerto Rico are designated as estuaries of national significance. EPA has a great website that provides more details, and I encourage folks to learn about the program as you are looking for information on this grant in particular. The Coastal Watersheds Grant Program was established by Congress as a competitive fund designed to help coastal areas and to address urgent and challenging issues. We at Restore America's Estuaries administer the program in close coordination with and funding from EPA. So we are in the second round. So if you are curious about what was awarded last time. It's also on our website, and I'll cover that a little bit in the presentation a little bit later. But just know that this is the second year, and so we're very excited to get underway. So we're going to launch into the eligibility. This is sort of one of the most critical aspects here. The polygons shown here on this map constitute the geographic eligibility areas. So this map, it's an interactive map. This is just a screenshot, but there is an interactive map that has a zoom function, and you can get detailed information. The link is in the RFP and on the EPA and RAE websites. Now, every time I talk about the EPA website, I'm specifically referring to the EPA's NEP website, just to be very, very clear. But again, the link is in a number of locations. The map is really easy to use. You can use a town, an address, or the zoom functions. Everything that is in orange is eligible. So some people are asking, you know, how did these get drawn? So the short version is that these polygons encompass the 28 existing NEPs, plus some additional upstream and or downstream portions. These are designated by EPA, so there is no wiggle room. So in other words, the project in its entirety, all activities, all sites, must occur completely within one or more of these polygons. So if someone says, oh, but I'm right outside of it, won't cut it. So let's see, I think, yep, Elsa just posted the link if you want to kind of play around with that as we go through the webinar. So this is an example I've gotten in the past. This is a real example. So somebody asked me, would a project on the Pascagoula River be eligible? So in case you can't quite see it, here's a Pascagoula River. Here is the geographic eligibility polygon. So the answer to this question is no, it would not be eligible. Okay, the next stop in eligibilities is entities. So the folks that are eligible include public organizations, state, county, local, regional entities. This can be a multi-jurisdictional regional entity, sometimes with various commissions or regional partnerships. Those would be allowed. Nonprofit organizations are allowed as eligible entities. And when I say entities, to be clear, it's the primary applicant. With nonprofits, you must be able to demonstrate your nonprofit status. Academic institutions, also pretty clear. Tribes, we got a great question on the last webinar. Federally recognized tribes and also state recognized tribes, so long as they have an organizational setup that would allow them to receive funding. So just be aware that, you know, so for example, there are some state recognized tribes that are set up as nonprofits. So that would automatically put them into the nonprofit bucket and they would be eligible as an applicant. Okay, so for-profit organizations and federal agencies may be on a team, but not as the applicant, okay? And so for the purposes of this conversation, the team member is an entity that will receive funds or will provide match and are listed in the budget. So if there is an organization that is acting in an advisory capacity or something like that, they would not officially be listed as a team member. We got some other questions. Can we partner with a local NEP? Absolutely. And then another question we've gotten in the past is how many awards can we get per round? And because, and I'll cover this a little bit later, because of the competitive nature of this grant, it is a 1 award per entity per round. Okay, what's not allowed, and just as a reminder, you are welcome to ask questions or have comments using the control panel. So just we're happy to try to answer some of those questions on the fly as they come up. Okay, so what's not allowed? Research. This would be sort of ivory tower, if you will, research. Everything that will be funded needs to show on the ground or the potential to have on the ground improvements. Let's see, standalone outreach and education. This is a little bit of a nuanced issue here. So we definitely want outreach and education as a part of the effort, because it's important to share what's happening and what's been found out, or what your findings are. However, if it is standalone, in other words, if outreach and education is the only deliverable, that is not allowed. Monitoring. So this would be follow-up monitoring, or if monitoring, again, is the only thing you're going to be doing, that won't fly. However, monitoring is part of a larger activity that helps inform or results in on-the-ground activities. That is allowed. Again, I would encourage everybody to read the RFP. There's more detail on this. Land acquisition. That is not allowed in terms of a cost to be, covered with the federal funding. However, it may be used for non-federal match. Similarly, social surveys, questionnaires, and similar efforts cannot be covered either in whole or in part. Any activity that's required as part of a legal settlement, mitigation, etc., those cannot be covered. Let's see. Each entity as an applicant is limited to 3 proposals per. So in other words, you can't submit 5 or 4, it's 3. Let's see what else. And if you have questions about any of this, please get in touch with me. And again, look at the RFP. Another question we have gotten is, are planning and feasibility studies allowed? These activities are eligible so long as the applicant demonstrates a clear connection between the proposed efforts and improved coastal estuarine conditions. So I'm going to pause there. It looks like we have some questions coming in. Are restoration design projects eligible? Again, this would fall into that comment that I just had about planning and feasibility studies. That would also include design and also permitting. So in other words, as long as the applicant demonstrates a clear connection to on the ground improved conditions, then that would fly. Research aspect. Okay, this is another case where if the research is going to result in on-the-ground changes, that's fine. If, however, the research is being done almost simply for research's sake, then that would not be allowed. And again, there is some nuance there, and I fully understand that. So if you have further questions that I do not answer, please email me. Okay, why no social surveys? So that has to do with some other federal guidelines, for lack of a better word, where and I can, Erin, if you want to email me, you are absolutely welcome. It's kind of a long story, but basically, depending on what you're trying to figure out, it has to rise to getting approval from OMB and some other aspects of that. So if you want to get into the weeds with that, I'm happy to provide some additional information. So I'm going to pause there. And Elsa, did I cover everything, or does anything else come in?
You covered all the questions that have come in so far.
Excellent, great, thank you. All right, we're going to go ahead and move forward. Okay, project requirements. Again, look at the RFP. There's a lot more detail in there, but I'm just going to highlight some of the big things that we in particular are going to be paying attention to. Any project must address one or more actions in the Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan, CCMPs. For those of you who are not familiar with these, each National Estuary Program, so each one of the 28, has one of these plans that sort of identifies what the priority challenges are in a given estuary and how they're going to address them. So any project has to tie back to one or more of those action items. Every project must be 1 to 2 years in length, and the project must be completed within the contractual time period. A project must yield environmental results and be able to report it. So that's part of that outreach. That's a part of that being able to show what the on-the-ground changes were, or what they will be if you're doing a feasibility design permitting project. And we've gotten a number of questions, and the focus is going to be on natural system benefits as opposed to infrastructure. So a couple of folks have asked in the past, like, well, what happens if we want to propose a project that protects some infrastructure? The focus really is on natural systems here. Okay, and for this RFP, the project must address one or more of the 3 priorities in this RFP. For this round, it is harmful algal blooms, loss of habitat, and flooding and coastal erosion. So for those of you who were interested in last year, you'll notice that this is a slightly different mix. And these relate back to the urgent and challenging threats that Congress identified when they established the program. So there is, again, the RFP lists all of these, and then what we have done is each RFP, we take a slightly different mix with the goal of having a variety of projects over the life of the program. Okay, I'm gonna pause there. And Elsa, I don't see any questions right now. Is that correct?
That is correct. I do see a hand raised, and just a reminder, if you do have a question, you can type it into the question box in the control panel.
Yep, that's definitely the easier way to go. Okay, on to funding a number of awards. We anticipate approximately $1 million to be awarded. Again, there's a little bit of wiggle room there depending on how the projects shake out. The per project cost is $75,000 to $250,000. So if you do the math, we anticipate a total number of awards ranging between 4 and 13. And it was interesting the last time people were like, well, how many did you give out last year? So the 2020 round, we awarded approximately 1.3 million to 8 projects. Now, the important thing to keep in mind on that one, and we'll get to the process of application here in a sec, but we had 206 LOIs come in for last year and ultimately ended up with 8 projects. So, just be aware that this is a highly competitive project, a highly competitive program. And those 206 LOIs were valued at $40 million in asks. So I'm not saying that scare anybody. I really want to see your LOIs. I just want folks to be aware of the nature of the demand that's out there. Okay. Elsa, any questions? I don't see any questions so far.
No new questions.
Excellent. Okay. On to budget and match. So this is this picture on the left, this spreadsheet, is an example that we have in the RFP of what the budget should look like in terms of what the various categories are. So please, please, please follow the RFP and all the instructions in there, particularly with respect to categories which reflect federal budgeting categories, which may differ from how your organization does it, how your state does it. Just be aware that you need to really pay attention to what goes where. Match is required. It's 33% of the non-federal match. So, for example, if you're requesting $100,000 from the Coastal Watersheds Grant Program, the required non-federal match would be $33,000 for a total project value of $133,000. So I would really encourage folks to really think through how you can get match. By all means, be ethical and legal and yet creative. We found over the years that sometimes people overlook some fabulous chances for match. And so again, if you have questions about what would or would not be eligible, please contact me and we're happy to help you with that. So some examples can be volunteer hours, in-kind contributions, time and effort of partners. And in-kind contributions can be something as relatively simple as someone's loaning you a boat, or you're going to have some, lab time at a local academic institution or a school that they are loaning you free of charge. All of that would fly. And I really encourage you to strongly think and dig deep on that, because I know that match can be sometimes a barrier and look more intimidating for folks who are doing that. One of the other things to be mindful of is match may not be from settlements or mitigation. This is different than some other programs. So if you're looking, the NERDA, Natural Resources Damage Assessments, cannot fly as non-federal match. Similarly, most NIFWF, so National Fish and Wildlife Foundation funds, cannot be used for match. There are some exceptions to that. So again, look at the RFP for details on that front. The other question we've gotten repeatedly is when can match have occurred? So match must occur and be expended during the contracted period. So for example, I mentioned earlier that land acquisition can be used for a non-federal match. If that land acquisition occurred 5 years ago, it won't be eligible in this context. Another question we've gotten is, can we do pre-awards, you know, to extend some life of the project to a certain extent? And the answer to that is it's a case-by-case basis, and we can usually do it for just a couple of months prior to the signing of the contract. But that is also on the applicant and is not a guarantee. So again, look at the RFP. We've got a lot of details about budget and match and all that good stuff. Okay, process and timeline. So this is sort of where the rubber hits the road, if you will. It's a two-step process. That is the same as last year. We ask for a letter of intent followed by a full proposal if invited. We do this to hopefully keep the process efficient and hopefully making the best of people's time. So new this year, this is very exciting. We now have an online submittal portal. The link is in the RFP. And again, what we lay out in the RFP, all the pieces that you're going to need to submit. We strongly encourage you, and this is in the RFP as well, we strongly encourage you to look at the RFP, develop all your materials, and then do the online submittal once everything is finalized. Now, you will be able to start and stop. So in other words, if you start your process, it will be saved. However, I just know from personal experience, not with this portal necessarily, but it's always a good idea to have your information elsewhere. Also, as a quick note, really keep an eye on those word limits. So there are word limits in each of the portions that will be required. Timeline and deadlines. Okay, your letters of intent are due June 7th. We will be notifying LOI submitters on July 19th regarding the status. In other words, either if you will be invited for a full proposal or if you will not be invited to submit a full proposal. We will let you know either way. For those of you who will be invited or hopefully will be invited for a full proposal, those will be due September 20th. And then we'll notify full proposal applicants of their award status on October 25th. And then the goal is to have the contracting done by the end of the calendar year. Now, this timeline is a little bit different than last year's. And for those, again, who were interested last year, we offered more time for folks to get their LOIs in, largely as a nod to the pandemic and everything else that was going on. And we are also tightening it up this year so we can get all that contracting done, and ideally making sure everything is well and fully ready to go before most people's field seasons. We are very aware of listed species windows and things like that. So we're really doing our best to make sure that folks can get out there and doing the work, assuming it's field-based. Okay, so evaluation frameworks are in the RFP. Those have been somewhat revamped from last time. Again, it's very, we did our best to be as transparent as possible, and we put it all in the RFP. Letter of acknowledgement from the local NEP. So this is a requirement, and please, please, please reach out to these folks sooner than later. It's the responsibility of the applicant to reach the deadlines. It is not incumbent on the NEP folks to, you know, if you ask them 2 days before the deadline, they might not be able to get it to you, okay? So please, please, please reach out sooner than later. The list of NEP contacts is on the EPA NEP webpage. So if you're on that webpage, there's a little call out box. that says Coastal Watersheds Grant, and it's got the link to the map. It also it says NEP contact. So it's an Excel spreadsheet. It's got the name, it's got the NEP, that is the name of the contact, the NEP, it's Casco Bay NEP or whatever, and then the email. So please make sure you reach out sooner than later. Okay, it looks like we have some questions or a question. Let's see. Oops, okay, some of them were for, okay, let's see. Okay, would projects with greater match be evaluated more favorably? So this becomes a question of, if you want to demonstrate that, that's fine. In other words, it certainly shows commitment on the part of other partners and things like that. And so I would encourage you to put that into the text somewhere, or if it's going to be in the budget, by all means, show it. Of the 200 plus LOIs, how many were asked to send a full proposal? Approximately 10%, give or take. When can projects start? This gets back to the contracting issue. If, our hope is to get all the contracting done. And again, please keep in mind that the contracting process can be iterative. So, the hope is to have the projects be able to start in the first quarter of 2022. Okay, can you send the link? I think. Okay, great. I think Elsa took care of that. Thank you, Elsa. Is a letter from the local NEP necessary for the LOI? Yes, it is required for both the LOI and the full proposal, but one letter will suffice for both. Yeah, so you definitely need to provide an LOI for the LOI. Sorry, you have to provide a letter from the NEP for the LOI along with the full proposal. Okay, in reading the RFP, it says all projects will require a QAP. Yes, basically you need to assume that a QAP will be required. So a QAP is a quality assurance project plan, for those not familiar with the acronym. In rare cases, there might not be one required, but so far every single project has required one. So when you're thinking about developing your budgets and your personnel time and things like that, assume it will be needed rather than the reverse. Okay, so the link to the local NEP contacts, Elsa, if you can answer that one, please, if you're available. LOI question: for an academic institution, do you need the signature of an authorized organizational leader? Good question. So we tried to answer this in the RFP, and maybe we didn't do a sufficient enough job. Basically, that the signature that we need, both for the LOI and the full proposal, and it will suffice for both, is someone who has basically authority to approve a project like this. In other words, if, for example, if you're an academic, let's say you're with the UCal system, we are not expecting like the head of the UCal system to provide their signature. It could be, basically someone who has the authorized legal power to make decisions and things like that. So if you need more information on that front, let me know. So for example, in our organization, that is at Restore America's Estuaries, in this circumstance, it would be our executive director. We would not necessarily need it to be our board chair, but however, it really depends on what the individual structure is of your organization. Okie dokie. All right, Elsa, do we have any other questions that I missed?
Did you answer the one about in the 2020 round, how many letters of intent were asked to send a full proposal?
Yes, it was approximately a little more than 10%, between 10 20%. Is there a template of the letter from the local NEP? So typically The local NEP has the template, and they will usually, the way it has went last year is that you contact your local NEP, you say this is a project that we're planning on submitting for consideration, and then they will develop the letter. So I hope that answers that question. And if you have any questions for me on that front, by all means, go ahead and email me. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to just kind of pause here on this slide. There is my information. Again, it's kind of scattered throughout the RFP. It's also on our website. There is also a link there to the additional details and the RFP document for this grant program. The other thing I will point you to, if you would like a little bit more of a podcast feel, I did record a podcast about this program that has some additional details, some additional background. It's about, I don't know, about 45 minutes or an hour long, and we go into some more of the policy aspects of it as well, should you want to explore that. Okie dokie, we did get another question. Do you have a list with summaries of the funded projects? Yes, it's on our website. If you go to that Watershed Grants link, that website right there, and you can go to the 2020 awardees. So that lists I think it's the name of the project, the organization, where they're located, and the size of the award. Okie dokie. Can we get a link to the podcast episode? We can't. You know, it might be on our website. I'm honestly not sure. I will double check on that. And Nathan, if you have some difficulties finding it, go ahead and email me and I will send you the link. So you said what we could not fund. A few words on what you would like to fund. Wow, that's a whole range of projects. So I guess I'll briefly touch on the 2020 awards, and they ranged from everything from, let's see, there was a very cool Living Shorelines project. We also funded a project that was a small piece of estuary restoration, was kind of a hydrological restoration piece that's part of a much bigger project. With the railroad, eelgrass restoration, marsh restoration down in Louisiana, working with a number of state recognized tribes, and a nonprofit that's kind of bringing them all together to protect sacred sites. A couple of nutrient monitoring as it relates to septic systems, roadway crossings, and so they're fabulously diverse, and they ranged in size from I think it was the lowest one it was like 75,000 to 80,000, somewhere in there, all the way up to 250,000. And so again, what's new for this RFP is we are including harmful algal blooms as instead of nutrients. So it's still that water quality perspective, but from a slightly different angle. And so we are really looking for projects that I guess they're kind of all over the place. I mean, it really depends on what you're hoping to propose. And I'm not trying to be vague here, but you know, the range of projects that we could fund is huge. And we also know and fully recognize that demand in our coastal areas for a lot of the challenges that they're facing is also huge. So if you have specific, and this goes for everybody, not just the person asking this question, if you have a concern or a question or are curious as to whether a project would likely be a good candidate or not, please email me, and I'm happy to, you know, we can either set up time to talk or I'll provide email help. Are emerging contaminants of concern? So they are not a priority of this RFP. The three priorities, one or more of which need to be addressed by any project, are harmful algal blooms, loss of habitat, and coastal flooding and erosion. Now, if you are, if the question is to say emerging contaminants in the context of some of those other things, then it certainly might be an eligible project. But I think you need to have more information in terms of that aspect. Okay.
Suzanne, I wanted
Yeah.
to note that I posted a link to the podcast in the chat and in the answer to the question.
Fabulous. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead and the podcast. It was a different way of talking about it. And we do go into some of the specific projects. I think 2 of them to be exact out of the 8. And so if folks are interested, okay. So by all means, check it out. For eligible entities, is it possible to have a consortium between an academic institution and nonprofit organizations with a consulting company? Okay, so I think the question is, can we have a team member that, a team that consists of a bunch of different types of entities? The answer is yes. The key point is that the applicant, in other words, the organization that will be doing all of the correspondence, the reporting, the handling of the money, really kind of the glue, if and the lead, for lack of a better word, that cannot be a federal agency. It cannot be a for-profit institution, and that would be a consulting firm or something along those lines. However, federal agencies, for-profit companies, things like that can be team members. So, for example, one of the projects that was selected for awards, like I said, the applicant was a nonprofit. They are working with state recognized tribes, also with an academic institution. And I'd have to remember correctly, but I'm pretty sure that there might be a for-profit company helping out in terms of some of the actual marsh restoration, like dirt moving kind of things. So absolutely. So the eligible entities really was, it really was referring to the applicant. Okay, so in other words, the organization that is going to be doing the heavy lifting as it relates to the overall administration of the project. If I understand, an entity can only be the lead applicant on one award. That is correct. So each entity can submit up to 3 LOIs in this case, but because of the competitive nature, they will only be eligible to receive 1 award. Okay, and we'll just pause there for a minute. Elsa, are there any others that came in that I did not catch?
I believe you have answered every question that has come in, but I invite the attendees to submit any questions if you have additional questions.
Yeah, so we'll just hang in there for another little bit. So funds can be budgeted also for federal team members. Yes, they can be. So we have this question come up a lot from folks in USGS. So, and in that circumstance, I'm gonna make up a circumstance where, let's say there's a nonprofit that wants to get, let's see, scientific support from a USGS partner. So the nonprofit would be the applicant, and then the federal entity would be a team member. So that is a big yes. One of the other words of caution that I will, I'm not caution, that's too strong a word, but just a heads up for folks who are working with organizations or entities that have overhead or indirect rates, make sure you get the full picture before you develop your budget. There can often be some interesting surprises in terms of the levels of indirect and overhead for some institutions. So there was a circumstance where someone asked an individual what their hourly rate was, and they put that in the budget. but they failed to realize that there was a rather substantial overhead and indirect, so that caused some hiccups in the budgeting down the road. It got resolved. It's not a big deal, but just wanted to make folks aware, if you haven't dealt with any organizations that have overhead or indirect, make sure you ask about that when you're developing the budget. Can an entity be a non-lead team member on more than one award? Can a non-lead team member? Conceivably, I guess, yes. So the way the number of LOIs is limited, we count it as who the applicant is. So conceivably, an organization could be, an applicant on one and a team member on the other. So I guess the answer is technically yes. But I think that it'll really depend on how the LOI process shakes out. Is there a limit on indirect rates? So there is a whole page in the RFP on indirect rates. If there is a it's called a NICRA, which basically it basically means when an organization has negotiated an indirect rate with any part of the federal government, and we as an entity and as a grant program are required to accept that. It's called a NICRA. We are required to accept that. However, if an organization does not have a NICRA, you can use a 10% de minimis rate or something along those lines. So there's a whole page devoted to that in the RFP, but there is not a limit per se. So let's say I'm going to make this up a little bit. Let's say an institution has an indirect rate of 60% or something, which is not out of the question. One thing that folks can do, and this gets back to the match question, is they can only maybe charge a percent of that. So let's say they charge a 40% indirect, and then you can actually use the remaining percentage towards your match. So that's another way to go about that. But we are required to accept any NICRAs that are out there. Okay. All right. Answered that one. Great. And like I said, I realize I keep repeating myself on this one, but if there is something that we haven't covered here, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I really do want to make sure that folks feel comfortable, and if they have questions, I'm absolutely happy to answer them. Okay. So Elsa, I think I've answered them. Did any sneak in while I wasn't looking?
No, you've answered all the ones that have come in so far.
Excellent. Great. Okay, so with that, ending on that exciting topic of indirect rates, I think with that, I will go ahead and close it off. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and please reach out to me if you have questions, and also a big thank you to Elsa, the disembodied voice in the background, for her help in providing links and answers, and in general, just being a huge help on this webinar. So on that note, thank you very much. I hope you all stay safe and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you and take care.